Most people think ghost towns are a Western thing. Dusty streets, rotting saloons, tumbleweeds. Arizona, Nevada, Colorado. The kind of place a John Wayne movie gets filmed. They're wrong. Missouri has more ghost towns per square mile than most people realize. Some were swallowed by rivers. Some were seized by the federal government and paved over without apology. Some died because a highway moved 2 miles east and it took everything with it. Some were poisoned so quietly that nobody noticed until the horses started dying. And most of them aren't on Google Maps. They aren't on road signs. In a few cases, they aren't even visible anymore. No foundations, no walls, nothing but a slight depression in the earth where a school or a general store once stood. These are 23 of them, and each one has a story that gets stranger the closer you look. Number 1 is Times Beach, and if you've never heard of it, that's exactly the point. In 1925, the St. Louis Star-Times ran a promotion. Buy a lot for $67.50, get a 6-month newspaper subscription. Families came. A resort town grew up on the banks of the Merrimack River, about 17 miles southwest of St. Louis. By the 1970s, more than 2,000 people were living there year-round. Then, in 1972, the town hired a waste hauler named Russell Bliss to oil its dirt roads for dust control. Bliss had a problem. He had been contracted to dispose of chemical waste from a pharmaceutical facility outside Verona, Missouri, a plant that had been making hexachlorophene as a byproduct of Agent Orange production. The waste was heavily contaminated with dioxin. Bliss's solution was to mix it into the road oil and spray it across dozens of Missouri towns and horse stables. Within days of the Times Beach spring, birds fell dead from barn rafters. Horses developed open sores and lost their hair. Children played in the street without knowing what was in the dirt. Nobody connected it for a decade. In December 1982, the Merrimack River flooded. The contaminated soil washed everywhere. The EPA arrived, tested the ground, and found dioxin levels 100 times higher than the threshold considered dangerous to humans. The federal government bought out every property, 800 homes and 30 businesses, for $33 million. By 1985, the town was disincorporated by executive order of Governor John Ashcroft. By 1992, every building was demolished. The cleanup took until 1997 and cost close to $200 million. Today, the land is Route 66 State Park. You can walk through it. There is no marker that tells you what used to be there. One building survived, the old roadhouse, now the visitor center. Everything else is grass. Number 2 is Bloodland. In 1940, Bloodland was a real town. It had a high school. It had 2 general stores. It had around 100 residents whose families had farmed that ground in Pulaski County for generations. Then the Army came. When the federal government needed land to build Fort Leonard Wood, one of the largest military training installations in the country, it did not negotiate. It gave residents notice and told them to leave. Federal bulldozers moved in. Bloodland ceased to exist. The church bell was the only thing saved. It was relocated to nearby Waynesville. Everything else went under. What remains sits inside active military property. You cannot visit without permission. Soldiers stationed at Fort Leonard Wood have reported seeing lights and hearing sounds in the Bloodland area since the 1940s. Whether that means anything is up to you. What is not up for debate is that an entire community was erased by government order, and almost nobody outside Pulaski County knows it ever existed. Number 3 is Hauns Mill, and this one is older and darker than almost anything else on this list. In October of 1838, 30 to 40 Mormon families gathered at a small settlement built around Jacob Hauns' grist mill on Shoal Creek in Caldwell County. Missouri's Governor Lilburn Boggs had issued what became known as Executive Order 44, the extermination order, declaring that Mormons must be driven from Missouri or exterminated. Tensions were at a peak across the state. On October 30, 1838, 250 militia members under Colonel Thomas Jennings rode into Hauns Mill without warning. The attack lasted roughly 30 minutes. When it was over, 18 people were dead, including children. Others were wounded. Women and children who survived hid in the woods. Missouri's extermination order was not formally rescinded until 1976, 138 years later. Hauns Mill is a flat patch of farmland in Caldwell County today. There is a marker. There is nothing else. Number 4 is Marian City. In the 1840s, Marian City was a legitimate river town, a bustling port on the Mississippi with ambitions to become one of the great cities of the inland waterway system. It had merchants, commerce, a future. In 1848, the Mississippi flooded and wiped it out. Residents rebuilt. Some of the population moved to nearby Palmyra, but enough people came back that the town tried again. Then a second flood hit, worse than the first. That was the end of it. Marian City was permanently abandoned. There is a highway marker on Route 168 near its former site. That is the entire physical evidence that several hundred people once staked their future on this spot and lost. Number 5 is Old Pattonsburg, and this one hits different because it happened in living memory. Pattonsburg in Daviess County had been a functioning town for over a century. It sat in the Grand River floodplain, and the floods kept coming. After the catastrophic Missouri floods of 1993, the worst in recorded state history, and then again in 1995, the federal government and the state offered residents a buyout and a deal. We will build a new Pattonsburg on higher ground. Most of them took it. Old Pattonsburg still stands technically. Some buildings are still there, but the population that gave it life is gone, and what remains is a hollow version of a town, walls without people, streets without purpose. Number 6, 7, and 8 go together because the federal government erased 3 towns at once. Hamburg, Howell, and Toonerville were all functioning communities in St. Charles County in 1941. Then the government needed land for the Weldon Spring Ordnance Works, a massive World War II munitions manufacturing facility. Residents of all 3 towns were displaced. Their homes were demolished. The land was absorbed into the military complex. After the war, the Weldon Spring site became a radioactive and chemical waste nightmare, requiring decades of remediation. The cleanup, eventually completed in the 1990s, was one of the largest in Missouri history. The 3 towns that once stood there are memorialized in virtually nothing. Even the cleanup project's public records barely mention them by name. Number 9 is Wakenda. Wakenda was a Carroll County river town on the Missouri, and it survived for a long time despite the river's moods. Then the 1993 flood hit. Then the 1995 flood hit. After 2 catastrophic inundations in 3 years, Wakenda was abandoned. The land where it stood floods regularly now, and there is essentially nothing left to find. Number 10 is Possum Trot. The name alone tells you something about the kind of place it was: small, rural, self-sufficient. Located about 8 miles southwest of Nixa in Stone County, it was at various points also called Self, which might be the most accurate name a community ever gave itself. Today, Possum Trot consists of a church and a house. That is the complete physical inventory of what survives. The general store that once anchored the community operated for decades under the same family name, Wilson, passing from generation to generation. Then, it didn't. Number 11 is Arlington. Before the interstate highway system, Route 66 made some towns and destroyed others. Arlington, west of Rolla in Phelps County, was one it eventually destroyed, but slowly enough that people didn't see it coming. Arlington was built around the Stony Dell Resort, which drew travelers off the original two-lane Route 66 starting around 1867. For decades it was a destination: swimming, rest, commerce. Then the highway was rerouted. The road that once delivered thousands of travelers past Arlington's front door became a dead end. Visitors stopped coming. Businesses closed one by one. The last business in Arlington shuttered in 2008. Roughly 20 people still live in the area, technically absorbed into nearby Newburgh. A few abandoned buildings remain. The Stony Dell is mostly demolished. What's left is overgrown. Number 12 is Red Oak. Red Oak in Bates County died the ordinary death of 1,000 small Missouri towns. The railroad did not stop there. The highway went somewhere else. The young people left and did not come back. Eventually, nothing remained but a few structures and a lot of silence. Then something strange happened. In 1987, a folk artist named Lowell Davis, who had been born in Red Oak, started buying the town back, building by building. He physically relocated structures from Red Oak and other area ghost towns to a field outside Carthage, Missouri, where he reassembled them piece by piece: a feed store, a blacksmith shop, a jailhouse, a church, and a schoolhouse. He called it Red Oak 2. It exists now as a kind of resurrection monument, a ghost town rebuilt by one man's refusal to let it disappear entirely. You can visit Red Oak 2. The original Red Oak is still a ghost. Number 13 is Georgia City. In 1868, a man named John C. Gwynn founded a new town in Jasper County and named it after the state he came from. Within a year, Georgia City had 200 residents and a post office. It looked like it might actually make it. Within a decade, it was down to 50 people. By the turn of the century, it was effectively gone. Nobody knows exactly what killed it. There was no flood, no fire, and no single event. It just slowly stopped being a place people chose to stay. That is its own kind of tragedy, and maybe the most common kind on this list. Number 14 is Monarch Springs. Monarch Springs in Newton County sounds like it should be a spa town, a beautiful spring, a resort, maybe a bottling plant. For a while it was all of those things. Then in the 1950s, a National Church of God meeting was held at Monarch Springs. Hundreds attended from across the country. A typhoid outbreak followed. The contaminated spring ended the town's identity overnight. It is now a state conservation area. The community that once surrounded the spring is gone. Number 15 is a town named Enough. Enough is in Iron County, and it got its name because when the founders submitted their first several choices to federal postal authorities, all of them were rejected because they were already taken by other towns in Missouri. When they finally submitted yet another option, the postal official processing the paperwork reportedly said they had had enough, and enough it became. The post office opened in 1916. It closed in 1937. That is the complete history of Enough, Missouri. Number 16 is Goldman. Goldman is a tiny, unincorporated community in Jefferson County, about 25 miles south of St. Louis on Old LeMay Ferry Road. It sits adjacent to the Sandy Creek Covered Bridge, one of only 4 covered bridges still standing in Missouri and a designated state historic site. Goldman itself is barely visible, a handful of structures, a crossroads that barely registers on a map. It earned a footnote in history in October 2000 for an entirely different reason. This is near where Missouri Governor Mel Carnahan died in a plane crash while campaigning for the United States Senate 3 weeks before the election. Missouri voters elected him anyway, posthumously, making him one of only 2 deceased candidates ever elected to the United States Senate. Goldman had nothing to do with any of that, but it is the closest named place on the map. Number 17 is Jollification. You do not forget that name. Jollification was established in 1848 in Lawrence County around a whiskey distillery and a grist mill, which tells you something about the priorities of its founders. It is now on the National Register of Historic Places, which means the federal government officially recognizes that Jollification, Missouri, is historically significant. Almost nobody has heard of it. There is no crowd. There is very little left to see. What remains is essentially a quiet piece of land with a name that feels like someone was definitely having a good day when they chose it. Avilla in Newton County was once a legitimate stagecoach hub, a stop where travelers heading west would rest and traders would exchange goods. Civil War skirmishes came through the area, and some buildings still standing when historians documented the town had bullet holes in their walls from that period. Silent witnesses to the war, as one account described them. The decline of the railroad that hollowed out so much of rural Missouri eventually hollowed out Avilla too. By the time Route 66 was decommissioned and travel patterns shifted, whatever economic engine had kept Avilla alive had been gone for decades. Number 19 is Paris Springs Junction. Paris Springs Junction was one of dozens of small communities that briefly thrived because Route 66 ran through them. When the highway was realigned and later superseded by the interstate system, the traffic that fed Paris Springs Junction simply disappeared. The town went with it. What is left is a stop on the old alignment that historians and Route 66 enthusiasts occasionally visit, precisely because so little has been touched. The decay itself is the attraction now. Number 20 is Cookville. Cookville sits in the western part of Pulaski County, in a forest near Fort Leonard Wood. It is surrounded by a river on multiple sides. All that remains are two houses. The forest has been slowly reclaiming everything else for decades. Getting there requires knowing where to look, and most people do not. Number 21 is San Andres del Missouri. This one surprises people every time. San Andres del Missouri, St. Andrew of Missouri, was a Spanish colonial settlement in what is now St. Charles County, established in the late 1700s when Missouri was under Spanish control. The Spanish Empire controlled this territory from 1762 to 1800, and they left settlements scattered throughout the region that most people have completely forgotten existed. San Andres is gone now, absorbed eventually into the American territorial expansion, and then into suburban St. Charles County without ceremony. But it was a real place with a real name under a flag that most Missourians do not associate with their state's history at all. Number 22 is Devil's Elbow. Devil's Elbow sits along the Big Piney River in Pulaski County and is one of the more visually dramatic spots on the old Route 66 alignment in Missouri. The name comes from the treacherous bend in the river that caused constant problems for log drivers moving timber downstream in the 19th century. The original highway community built up around a bridge crossing in the 1920s. The bridge and the bend in the river made Devil's Elbow a stop, a place travelers noticed and remembered. Then a new alignment of Route 66 bypassed the area, redirecting traffic away from the river crossing. Devil's Elbow has a small permanent population today, but the commercial life that once existed there is gone. What survives is the river, the bend, and a stretch of original Route 66 pavement that feels like driving into a different century. Number 23 is Old Mines. Old Mines may be the most quietly remarkable ghost town on this list. It sits in Washington County, roughly 60 miles southwest of St. Louis. And it was settled by French-Canadian lead miners in the early 1700s, before Missouri was American territory, before the Louisiana Purchase, before Lewis and Clark. The miners came for the galena deposits in the St. Francois Mountains, and they stayed, generation after generation, in relative isolation. Because of that isolation, the community at Old Mines preserved a dialect of French known as Missouri French, or Paw French, that had survived nearly unchanged since the 1700s. Linguists were still documenting it in the 20th century. It was spoken by elderly residents in the mid-1900s who had learned it from grandparents, and those grandparents had learned it from earlier generations tracing back to colonial-era Quebec. It is now functionally extinct. The last fluent speakers are gone. Old Mines still has a small population and a historical marker. But the thing that made it extraordinary, an unbroken living link to 18th century French colonial Missouri, is gone, and no amount of preservation can bring it back. Here's what connects all 23 of these places. None of them disappeared because the people who lived there wanted them to. Towns do not die by choice. They disappear because a river floods in the wrong year, because the army needs the land for a war, because a highway engineer draws a line 2 miles east, because a waste hauler mixes poison into road oil and nobody catches it for a decade. Missouri has hundreds of places like this, communities that existed, that mattered to the people who built them, and that are now invisible on every map you are likely to consult. Most of them have no marker. Most of them have no monument. If this channel has taught you anything, it is that the history worth knowing is usually the history nobody has bothered to tell you. If you are not subscribed yet, now is a good time. Hit that button and the bell. There is more of this coming, and you do not want to miss it. What do you know about Missouri ghost towns that did not make this list? Drop it in the comments. People from these communities still have living memory of some of these places, and if you are one of them, we want to hear from you.